The first thing I noticed when he walked in that Friday night wasn't the cologne. It was the way he didn't kiss me. 8 years of marriage, and Brandon had always kissed the top of my head when he came home. Not a romantic gesture, more like a habit, the way some men toss their keys in the same bowl every night. That Friday, he walked right past me into the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it without taking anything out, and said over his shoulder, "Don't hold dinner for me Saturday. I'm grabbing a bite with someone." I was loading the dishwasher. I remember because I had a fork in my hand, and I stared at it for a second like I'd forgotten what it was for. "Someone?" I said. "Yeah, a friend. From the office." "Which friend?" he sighed. The kind of sigh a teenager gives a parent who's asking too many questions. "Tessa, from accounting. She just went through a divorce and she's been kind of a mess. I said I'd grab dinner with her, that's all. I want you to understand something. I'd met Tessa twice. Once at the company Christmas party in Plano, and once when I dropped off Brandon's lunch because he'd forgotten it on the counter. She was 31, blonde in the way that costs money, and she'd looked at me at that Christmas party like I was a piece of furniture someone had forgotten to take out of the room. But I said, "Okay, that's nice of you." Because that's what I always said. "Okay, that's nice of you." Because that's what I always said. "Okay, that's nice of you." "Of course, honey. 8 years of okay. My name is Hayley. I'm 34. I live just outside Fort Worth, in one of those neighborhoods where every house has a basketball hoop in the driveway and a flag by the front door. I used to be a paralegal in Dallas, downtown, 62nd floor of a building where you could see the lights for miles. I gave that up when Brandon's company offered him a regional manager position and we bought the house in Alado. Just for a year or two, I told myself. Just for a year or two, I told myself. Just until we settle in. That was 6 years ago. I'd been working part-time at a real estate office, answering phones, filing paperwork. The kind of job you take when you've talked yourself into believing you don't want a career anymore. Brandon went out that Saturday at 6:45. He wore the gray button-down I'd bought him for his birthday and the cologne his sister gave him last Christmas, the one he never wore because he said it was too much. That night it wasn't too much. That night it splashed it on like a man trying to impress somebody. I sat at the kitchen island until almost 10 o'clock with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself 1,000 things. And around 10:15, my phone buzzed. It was a Venmo notification. Brandon had sent Tessa Whitfield $84 with the note for last night's shirtic too. The winking face. That's what did it. Not the $84. Not even for last night. The winking face. Because the winking face meant playful. It meant they had a thing. It meant he wasn't thinking about me at all when he typed it. He came home at 11:40. I was already in bed with the lights off. I heard him in the bathroom for a long time, water running. When he slid under the covers, he smelled like her. Not just perfume, but something deeper. The smell that's left after you've been pressed against someone for hours. I didn't say anything. I lay there with my eyes open until the clock read 3 a.m., and somewhere around 2:30 I made a decision that I think a part of me had been making for a very long time. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to be quiet, and I was going to be patient, and I was going to take back every single thing he thought he could keep. The next morning, I made him pancakes. You should have seen his face. He came into the kitchen in his sweatpants and his hair sticking up like a little boy's. And there I was, flipping pancakes, the coffee already poured. "Hey, Hales," he said carefully, like he was testing the temperature of a pool. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make us breakfast." He sat down. He ate 3 pancakes. He told me about a deal his team was closing in Houston. I smiled and nodded and asked the right questions. When he kissed me on the way out, first time in maybe a week, I let him. The moment his truck pulled out of the driveway, I called my sister Brooke. Brooke is 2 years younger than me, and she has the kind of personality that should come with a warning label. She's a divorce attorney in Austin. She picked up on the second ring and said, "What's wrong?" Before I even said hello, Because Brooke has always been able to hear the temperature of my voice through a phone, I told her everything. The Venmo. The cologne. The way he'd been on his phone in the bathroom for the last 3 months. The way he'd stopped touching me except when he was drunk, and even then like he was doing me a favor. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Hayley, listen to me very carefully. Don't say a word to him. Don't change anything about your routine. Don't even let him see you cry. I'll be there Tuesday." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to make sure that when this ends, you end up holding everything that matters, and he ends up holding the bag." I started crying then, not because I was sad, though I was, but because for the first time in 8 years, somebody was telling me what I was going to do instead of asking me what he needed. Brooke flew in on Tuesday morning. She rented a car so Brandon wouldn't see her come or go. We sat at my kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a yellow legal pad, and she walked me through what she called the inventory. The house was the first thing. We bought it 6 years ago for $340,000. Brandon had put down $20,000, but the rest of the down payment, $50,000, had come from an inheritance from my grandmother in Tulsa. The deed was in both our names. Texas is a community property state, Brooke explained, which means that on paper, half of everything we'd built was mine, including the equity in the house, which had grown to almost $180,000. But she pointed out something I hadn't thought about. My grandmother's $50,000 was traceable. There were bank records. There were transfers. That money, even mixed into a joint asset, could potentially be claimed as separate property. "Pull the records," she said. "Every transfer, every statement, every check. I want them in a folder by Friday." The retirement accounts were next. Brandon had a 401k through his company, which had grown to about $215,000. He had a Roth IRA at Fidelity with another $48,000. I had a small 401k from my paralegal days at the firm in Dallas, $39,000. In Texas, all of these were community property to the extent they'd grown during the marriage. Brooke wrote down numbers, asked me for login information, told me to log into everything that night while Brandon was at his Tuesday night basketball league at the church. And the cars? His F-150, leased, in his name. My Honda Pilot, paid off, in my name. Easy. The credit cards? 3 joint cards. Brandon was the primary on 2 of them. Balances totaling around $11,000. Brooke had me freeze our joint credit reports that afternoon. Then she asked me the question I'd been afraid she was going to ask. "Is there anything in the house that's just yours? Anything sentimental? Anything you couldn't bear to lose?" I thought about it. My grandmother's pearls. The quilt my mom made me when I went to college. A box of photo albums from before everything went digital. My books. 3 shelves of paperbacks I'd been collecting since I was 16. "I want all of it packed up and moved to a storage unit by next week," Brooke said. "Not all at once, a little at a time. Stuff he won't notice." "He won't notice anyway," I said, and I meant it as a joke, but the way she looked at me made me realize it wasn't. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In one, I was Brandon's wife. I made him dinner. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. I went to his nephew's baseball game in Granbury on a Saturday and stood with his sister Megan in the bleachers and pretended I didn't know that Brandon was texting Tessa from his phone 3 feet away. I even made love to him once, the Sunday of week 2, because I knew if I stopped he'd start asking questions. It was the worst hour of my life. I went into the bathroom afterward and threw up so quietly he didn't hear me. In the other life, I was Hayley Marsh, my maiden name, the one Brooke kept calling me, the one I was slowly learning to answer to again. I opened a checking account at a different bank, one we'd never used, a credit union in Weatherford. I deposited a check from my mother. She'd sold her car and given me $4,000 to start with, no questions asked. I opened a savings account too, and a credit card in just my name. I'd been a paralegal long enough to know that the woman who walks out of a marriage with nothing is the woman who didn't plan. I called my old boss in Dallas, Marcia, who'd told me 3 different times over the years that there'd be a job waiting for me whenever I wanted one. I told her the truth. She said, "Hayley, come in Friday. We'll figure out the rest." Just like that, I started boxing things up. A little at a time, like Brooke said. The pearls went in my purse one Tuesday and into a safe deposit box at the credit union by Wednesday. The quilt got folded into a Target bag and ended up at my mom's house in Granbury. The photo albums I scanned, page by page, late at night when Brandon was asleep, and uploaded to a private cloud drive. The originals went in the storage unit I'd rented in Willow Park, $89 a month, paid for from my new account. And every night, I logged into our joint accounts and watched. Brandon was being sloppy. I think when a man decides he's about to get away with something, he stops covering his tracks because he doesn't believe anyone's looking. He took Tessa to a steakhouse in Southlake on a Wednesday, $217 on the joint Amex. He bought her something at a jewelry store in Grapevine, $490, no description. There was a hotel charge in Fort Worth, the Omni, $312. On a Thursday afternoon when he told me he was meeting a client in Arlington, he never even bothered to switch cards. I screenshotted everything, every charge, every statement. I forwarded them to a folder in my new email account, the one he didn't know existed. On a Sunday in early March, Brandon told me he was going to a conference in Scottsdale for 3 days. He said he'd be back Wednesday night. I said, "Have a good trip." And I kissed him on the cheek. The minute his truck disappeared down the street, Brooke pulled into the driveway in her rental car. She'd flown in that morning. She had a tote bag full of file folders and a thermos of coffee and the kind of look on her face that I'd seen on her exactly twice before in my life. Once when she got her bar exam results, and once when she told a guy in college that if he ever spoke to me like that again, she'd make him regret it. We spent 3 days cataloging the entire house, every piece of furniture, every appliance, every electronic, every piece of art on the walls. We photographed it all. Brooke made me identify for each item who had bought it, when, and with what money. The dining room table was my mother's, separate property. The couch had been a wedding gift from Brandon's parents. Gray area, but probably his. The TV was his bonus from 2022, his. The standing mixer was a gift from my aunt, mine. The grill was joint. The bed was joint. The dishes were mine, from before we got married. By the end of Tuesday night, the house was a spreadsheet. She also had me sit down at the kitchen table with a notebook and write out a timeline. Every fight, every cruel thing he'd said, every promise he'd broken. The time he'd told me at his cousin's wedding in Waco that I'd let myself go, in front of 3 other couples. The time he'd canceled our anniversary trip to Santa Fe because he had a work thing that, I now realized, looking back, had probably been Tessa. The time he'd told me, and this is the one that still makes my hand shake, that I should be grateful he hadn't left me yet. I wrote it all down, 23 pages. Brooke read it sitting across from me. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "Hayley," she said, "you should have called me 4 years ago." "I know. Why didn't you?" I couldn't answer that. I still can't, completely. I think when you're inside a marriage like that, you don't see it the way other people see it. You see one bad day, and then a good day, and then a bad week, and then a great weekend, and you keep counting up the good days like a kid saving pennies, telling yourself that if you have enough of them stacked up, they'll outweigh the rest. They never do, but you don't know that until you stop counting. Brandon came home Wednesday night and noticed nothing. Not the missing quilt, not the missing books, not the missing pearls. He noticed nothing because he had never in 8 years actually looked at the life I had built around him. That, I think, is when I knew he was going to lose. The confrontation came on a Friday in late March, and it didn't come the way I'd planned it. It came because Brandon got cocky. He came home from work and dropped his keys on the counter and said casually, like he was telling me the weather, "Hales, I'm thinking I'm going to grab dinner with Tessa tonight. Don't wait up. Honestly, I think you should know we've gotten close. It's just dinner, but I'm not going to lie to you about it anymore." I was at the stove. I had a wooden spoon in my hand. I turned around very slowly. Close how? Just close. We talk. She gets me. She gets you. He sighed. The same sigh from January. Look, Hayley, our marriage it's been over for a while, hasn't it? Don't pretend it hasn't. We don't talk. We don't have fun. You're not the same person I married. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying we both let it go. And Tessa makes me feel alive again, like I matter. I'm not going to apologize for needing that. He said all of this with his hand in the refrigerator, looking for a beer. I set the wooden spoon down on the counter. I walked to the kitchen island and I picked up my phone and I called Brooke and I said, "It's time." I watched his face change as he heard me say it. He didn't know what it meant. He just knew that I wasn't reacting the way I was supposed to. "Who are you calling?" he said. "My attorney." "Your what?" He laughed. He actually laughed. "Hayley, come on. Don't be dramatic." "Nobody said anything about a Brandon," I said. "I want you out of this house tonight. You have until 9 p.m. to pack a bag. Anything else will do through lawyers." The laugh died on his face. "You can't kick me out of my own house. Watch me. Hayley, Brandon. I have screenshots of every charge you've made on the joint card for Tessa Whitfield since January. I have hotel receipts. I have jewelry receipts. I have the Venmo with the winking face. I have your text messages, because you forgot you signed into our shared iPad last month and your iMessages sync. I have 8 years of statements showing exactly what I contributed to this marriage and exactly what you took from it. I have my grandmother's $50,000 traced from her account to ours, to this house's down payment. And I have a sister who hasn't lost a divorce case in 9 years. He stared at me. I watched something in his face crumble. Not sadness, not yet. Just recalculation. The face of a man who has just realized that the room he's been standing in is not the room he thought it was. "You're bluffing." "Pack a bag, Brandon. This is my house. Half of it is mine. And the half that was funded by my grandmother, that's also mine. You can fight it, you'll lose. Or you can pack a bag and go to Tessa's tonight. I'm sure she's excited to have you." He didn't pack a bag that night. He stormed out. He drove off and he didn't come home, and I lay in bed alone, in the house I'd filled with someone else for 8 years, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like air. The next 4 months were a war. Brandon hired an attorney out of Dallas, a man named Greg Hadley, who Brooke had faced twice before and beaten both times. Greg's strategy was to drag everything out, to make me tired, to make me settle. He countered every offer. He demanded the house. He claimed Brandon had paid more into the marriage than I had. He tried to argue that my grandmother's inheritance had been commingled and therefore community property. But Brooke had built our case like a wall. Every document, every screenshot, every receipt, every trace dollar from my grandmother's accountant in Tulsa to the title company in Fort Worth. She produced bank statements going back 12 years. She subpoenaed Brandon's work email and found a 6-month chain with Tessa that included, and I'm not making this up, a forwarded photo of our wedding album with the caption, "Lol, when I was a different person." It was the wedding album line that made the judge's jaw tighten. I saw it happen. The mediation took 2 days. The settlement gave me the house. Brandon was bought out for $52,000, which was less than half of what he thought he was entitled to, once my grandmother's money was carved out. I kept my retirement. He kept his, minus the portion that had accrued during the marriage that we split. He took on the credit card debt because most of it after audit turned out to have been spent on Tessa. He also had to pay me $1,800 a month in spousal support for 30 months because, and Brooke had set this up beautifully, my income at the real estate office, the income I had taken on after giving up my paralegal career for him, was demonstrably lower than what I would have earned had I stayed in Dallas. We had the salary projections. We had the testimony from Marcia. We had everything. I went back to the firm in Dallas in June. Marcia gave me my old desk back. 62nd floor, the same view of the city I used to look at when I was 26 and didn't yet know how much of myself I was about to give away. They started me at $74,000. Within a year, I was making $86,000. Within a year, I was making $86,000. Within 2 years, I was being trained to take over the senior paralegal role. Tessa, by the way, lasted about 11 weeks. I found out from Megan, Brandon's sister, who texted me out of the blue one Sunday in September. "I don't know if it matters," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know. Tessa moved out. Brandon's been crashing at our parents' place. He's a mess. I'm so sorry, Hayley. I should have said something years ago. I saw it. I just didn't know how." I didn't write back right away. I thought about it for a few days, and then I wrote, "Thank you. I'd like to stay in touch." And we have. She brings her kids to my house for Halloween now. Brandon, I hear, has moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Bedford. He drives a 2019 Camry. The F-150 went back when he couldn't make the lease payments. I haven't seen him in person since the day of the final hearing. He stood up at the end of it and he tried to make eye contact with me, and I think he wanted to say something. "I'm sorry," or "How did it come to this?" or maybe just "Please." I don't know. I never looked up. I gathered my papers and I walked out of that courthouse with my sister, and we drove to a barbecue place in Fort Worth and ate brisket and drank sweet tea and didn't talk about him once. I want to tell you something because I know some of you are listening to this and you recognize pieces of it. Maybe you recognize the cologne. Maybe you recognize the sigh. Maybe you recognize the way your husband looks past you when he's talking to you. The way he reaches for his phone the second the conversation gets quiet. I spent 8 years believing that loving someone meant being patient with their worst self. I spent 8 years believing that if I just made myself smaller, quieter, easier, more pleasant, more understanding, eventually he would notice me again. He wouldn't. Men like Brandon don't come back to women they've trained themselves to overlook. They just keep looking past them for something newer. The truth is, my marriage didn't end the night he told me to not wait up for dinner. It ended a long time before that. In 100 small moments I taught myself not to count. The Venmo notification didn't break us. It just gave me permission to stop pretending. I'm 35 now. I live alone in the same house in Aledo, and I painted the bedroom a color Brandon would have hated, a deep, warm green like a forest in late summer. I have a dog now, a rescue mutt named Ranger who sleeps on the foot of my bed. I read for an hour every night before I go to sleep. I cook dinner for one, and I don't apologize for it. My sister Brooke comes up from Austin every other month, and we drink wine on the back porch and laugh about things that used to make me cry. Last week, Megan asked me if I thought I'd ever marry again. I told her I didn't know. I told her that for the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to decide who I was based on who I was sleeping next to. I told her that the woman who walked out of that courthouse in June was not the same woman who'd walked into that house 8 years ago, and that I was still getting to know her, and that I liked her, and that was enough for now. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. The strongest thing a woman can do when a man tells her she's boring is to believe him, not because he's right, but because the moment you believe him, you stop trying to be exciting for someone who is never going to look up anyway. You stop performing. You start preparing. And one quiet Tuesday morning, while he's still asleep on the other side of the bed, you pick up your phone and you call the person who's been waiting your whole life to help you build the rest of it. The rain was tapping on the kitchen window the morning I drove away from that courthouse for the last time. I remember thinking, he doesn't even know he lost yet. He thinks he's between things. And maybe in a way he was right, because some men spend their whole lives between things, chasing the next bit of excitement, and they never figure out that the thing they walked away from was the only home they were ever going to have. I drove east toward Dallas with the windows down and the radio on, and somewhere around the city limits I started to laugh. Not a sad laugh, not a bitter one. The kind of laugh you laugh when you finally get a joke that was on you for a very long time. I'm not boring. I'm just done being his audience. I used to think the hardest part of leaving Brandon would be the leaving itself. The packing. The signatures. The empty side of the bed. It wasn't. The hardest part was looking back, in the months that came after, and seeing all the little moments where I'd handed him the permission to treat me the way he did. Not because I deserved it. Nobody deserves that. but because every time I said okay when I meant this is killing me, I taught him that my silence was the same thing as my consent. He didn't wake up one morning a stranger. I shrank year by year until I'd made room for him to become one. That's the part nobody tells you about cause and effect inside a marriage. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it's 1,000 tiny choices that compound like interest. Every dinner I didn't speak up at, every birthday I pretended wasn't disappointing, every comment I laughed off instead of called out. Those weren't kindnesses, they were deposits in an account he eventually emptied. And the Venmo notification with the winking face wasn't the betrayal. It was just the receipt for a debt that had been growing for years. What saved me, in the end, wasn't anger. I want to be honest about that. Anger came later, and it burned out fast. What saved me was 3 quieter things, and I think about them every day now. The first was deciding I would not lie to myself anymore. About him, about us, about what I was worth. That took more courage than walking out the door ever did. The second was using my mind instead of my heart for 90 days straight. Calling Brooke. Tracing my grandmother's money. Scanning the photo albums at midnight. Building a wall of paper while he thought he was building a future with somebody else. Intelligence isn't just being smart. Sometimes it's just being willing to write things down when your hands are shaking. And the third was the part nobody applauds because it happens alone. Getting up every morning for 4 months and putting on the same performance with the same smile, knowing that if I cracked once, I'd lose. That's not patience, that's discipline. That's the kind of strength that gets built one boring Tuesday at a time. I think about Tessa sometimes. Not with hatred. She didn't owe me anything. And she got her own version of the truth. 11 weeks in. I think about her because she reminds me that excitement is the cheapest thing a person can offer. Anyone can be exciting for a season. Almost nobody can be steady for a lifetime. Brandon traded the second for the first, and the math caught up with him the way math always does. If you're listening to this and you recognize the silence in your own kitchen, please, don't wait for a winking face. Start writing things down. Call your sister. Open your eyes. The life you build quietly, while no one's watching, is the only one nobody can take from you.